Welcome. I get to be your instructor for this next module on positive youth development. My hope is that you'll understand the foundations of the positive youth development approach through this course, and I hope that you will be able to apply this PYD framework to your understandings of adolescence in this time of pandemic, and not only as you go through this course, but also beyond the classroom. I hope that you'll be able to align the work that you will do and the work you may be doing right now with strategies that nurture a thriving trajectory and really bring out the best in youth. So what is youth development? My view of youth development is that it's work that addresses the needs of a young person to meet the challenges of adolescence and position them to meet their full potential as they transition on into the next stages of their life and throughout their life. When we look at youth development, we tend to think in 4 different domains: physical, social, cognitive, and emotional. Physically, older youth have generally overcome the awkwardness of puberty. Many are still very concerned with body image, and that will continue. And boys may still be growing and at a fast pace. Socially, youth at this age often want to belong to a group, but they also want to be recognized as individuals. There can be a strong desire for status among their friends, and they often are really interested in adult-like leadership roles. They become interested in activities which may put them in contact with those for whom they might be attracted. So this is a very interesting time of life. Cognitively, youth at this age are developing a community consciousness, a bigger picture outlook, and a concern for the well-being of others. They are increasingly knowledgeable of themselves, they're learning about themselves, and a personal philosophy begins to emerge. They're reaching high levels of abstract thinking and problem solving. Their brains are doing things they've never been able to do before, and it's pretty amazing. And they're aware of major changes they're going to need to be prepared for after high school, whether it's vocational training, college, the military. Life is about to change, and they're keenly aware of it. Emotionally, feelings of inferiority and inadequacy are common. They're gaining independence, and they're developing an individual identity. So when we work with youth professionally, there's 3 approaches that things often fall into. One is the prevention approach, and that's really concerned with risk factors and then the assets, the strengths that youth bring. And the goal there is to eliminate problems or reduce problems at least. Developmentally, we're looking at successful maturation, meeting those developmental needs that youth have in each phase of their life. Education, that's where we're looking at a focus on skills and knowledge and really making sure that they learn the things they need to learn to be successful. And I would argue that for the purposes of this course, you're here. We're right where it all combines. And right now we're looking at a developmental approach, but the rest of this will come into play as well. Now, some of what you hear in this module may conflict with other things that you've heard or been told. And I really want to focus on where we've been just for a moment so that we can kind of frame that and then move on to where we're going. Starts in 1904 with Gene Stanley Hall writes a book launching the scientific study of adolescent development, and he describes adolescence as a period of storm and stress. The deficit approach to the study of adolescent development was born inadvertently, but the idea was that puberty led to biological and social problems, which then became the focus rather than the individual themselves. So in this approach, the behavioral traits and the emotions of teens were often described in ways that didn't really cast them in the best light. 3 researchers noted that youth are labeled with D words as they looked at the literature, such as disturbed, disordered, deprived, deviant, disadvantaged, disruptive, disrespectful, and disobedient. Social scientists at the time studied the youth populations that were available, and this is the key. The populations they were studying often came from places like juvenile detention facilities, mental health facilities, and the criminal justice system. Now, much of the research was actually quite good. The key is that the findings were incorrectly generalized to the larger population. In other words, what they found through this research was spot on for the youth that they studied and youth in populations like the ones they studied, but maybe not for those who are growing up outside of those facilities or conditions. And you can imagine it would just be a very different existence being raised in a mental health facility or a juvenile detention facility for much of your youth, as opposed to in a home with a loving parent. Prior to the 1970s, there were really no major studies of youth within the family context. But these findings did seem to confirm G. Stanley Hall's famous description of adolescence as a time of storm and stress. It took root very easily in the criminal justice system and in mental health models. And the focus on prevention of problems and cleaning up those problems and the risk behaviors were all grounded in the things that were wrong, that they saw were wrong with youth today, rather than these strengths and these possibilities. So this focus on prevention and remediation ended up having an enormous effect on the study and the public perception of teens. It's been noted that from around the 1950s to around 2000, adolescent research was really anchored in this whole mindset of developmental deficits, with this focus on preventing problems and dealing with risk behaviors in broken individuals. And the results of this perception had a huge driving effect on pediatric medicine, psychology, criminal justice policy. So now that we've covered that, let's talk about positive youth development, which is really the focus of this module. It's a fairly new framework that's emerged in the last 2 decades. It reframes this view of adolescence as a period of opportunity, as a developmental period that provides these unique opportunities for very positive impacts, and these impacts can last a lifetime. The focus is really not on trying to minimize undesirable behaviors and outcomes that are just inevitable, but it takes a strengths-based approach instead. I mean, think about it. When are you ever going to have more brain power, more mobility, and less responsibility at any point in your life than when you're a teenager? That's incredible. When we talk about positive youth development theory, it's important to know that there is no really one single theory of positive youth development. It's like an umbrella. It covers many different perspectives and approaches, and you have to be careful, because sometimes, like when you hear that song for the first time and then that becomes the right way that song's supposed to go, and you hear another version of that song and it just doesn't seem correct, there are some common threads that weave through each of the different approaches. And if you understand what they are, it makes it a lot easier to really value and appreciate each of the different takes on the positive youth development approach. Most positive youth development perspectives share 3 common threads. 1, a relationship between an individual and their context, which is probably a new term. Another new term is the concept of sparks. And then the potential for life trajectories that are very positive and productive. So number 1, the individual context relationship. What is a context? When we say context, we're talking about the people, the places, the environment, and circumstances that surround a young person in their life. It includes their communities, their schools, and the organizations they're a part of, their peer groups, their friends, and their families. Have you ever had a relationship or a job situation where you felt like you were giving and giving, but you weren't really getting anything back? Or maybe the other person was doing all the giving and it just wasn't really resonating with you and you weren't that into it. Well, that happens. And what we're hoping when we talk about the individual context relationship with youth is that the relationship is positive and both are benefiting from that association. For example, if they're in a 4-H club or a sports team, that they're contributing to that team or that club, and then that club membership or that being part of the team is also enriching them individually. Bidirectional, mutually beneficial. These relationships can regulate the course of an adolescent's development. It's really hard to overstate how important these relationships are. So what are some of the contexts that young people are interacting with right now in this age of pandemic? Their family and their peer responses to safety measures and milestone losses may be one. They've lost their senior proms or their junior proms, or maybe the opportunity to finally graduate with all their family and friends present. There's also stress levels of their family. Maybe their parent is involved in a dangerous occupation. Like maybe they're a housekeeper for a hospital floor dealing with COVID patients, or a sanitation worker, maybe a nurse or a doctor or a first responder, and all sorts of really important occupations that are also very dangerous and very exposed. And that can create a lot of stress, not only in the individual, but in the family. They also may have parents who have lost their jobs in this economy, and that may contribute to, housing insecurity. Are we going to have a house? Are we going to get evicted? Do we have a place to live? Food insecurity. And also the shelter-in-place environment we have in many cases where you may have a bad relationship situation that's just being exacerbated because you're all stuck there together. So it can exacerbate positive or negative things. All these things can contribute to family stress levels, and that family is an important part of the individual's context. We know that social connections are more important than ever during the period of adolescence, and these are largely being disrupted, or at least changed. Now, the second common thread is a term called sparks. And when we say sparks, we're talking about something an individual is passionate about. It may be a skill or a talent, like music, art, sports. It could be a commitment. They may be passionate about social justice or environmental advocacy, for example. It can be a quality. Maybe they're that person that prides themselves on being the smart one. They're the ones that analyze things a little deeper than everybody else. Or maybe they're the spiritual one that the friends go to for inspiration, or maybe empathy. They're the good friend that can always be counted on, and they love being that person. Sparks are something that kind of help define who we are. So sparks cannot be assigned. They cannot be given by adults, for example. They are self-identified. It's something a young person discovers. They come from deep within. They provide joy, purpose, direction, energy. Sometimes your spark is what really gets you out of bed in the morning in a tough time and gives you something to look forward to in that day. So I'd like to take a moment and think about, what is one of your sparks? What is a skill or commitment or quality that is really just a central part of who you are? When did you discover it? Were there any specific people or opportunities that kind of led to you discovering or developing this? Please pause this video for just a moment or two and think about these questions. And when you have some firm answers, go ahead and unpause. I promise I'll be right here. All right. Well, let's talk about why sparks are important. Sparks create actions that really benefit the young person, but more often than not, they also benefit the larger society. Sparks provide the intrinsic fuel that powers youth to grow and build new skills. You may not be great with technology, but you may know that, gosh, if I'm going to find out what I need to know and really explore this thing I'm passionate about, I'm going to have to learn how to use a computer. I'm going to have to go to the library and learn how to research things. I'm going to have to talk to people and become more social if I want to lead in the way that I'm passionate about. Sparks can spur youth to build networks of others who share their interests. And they create opportunities for connection with caring adults who have the expertise that can help them as they pursue those sparks. This is a really important thing. When I teach public speaking, I key into their sparks as the first step. Find 3 things they're passionate about, they're really interested in, and then we have them create the speech around those topics. It's interesting that when young people are talking about something they're passionate about, they're no longer nearly as afraid of speaking in front of the group because that spark is driving them. It's providing the intrinsic fuel. Sparks can create so many opportunities, and it's important to be aware of that. Emerging research suggests that youth engagement in these activities is a predictor of positive adjustment. This includes a larger sense of purpose in life, higher self-esteem, more optimism. That's a pretty good place to be, especially if you're dealing with all these other tasks of adolescence. You're trying to identify who you are. You're trying to reach out and make friends and be part of a group. Wouldn't this be an amazing step up? Wouldn't this be a tremendous asset to have a sense of purpose in life, feel good about yourself, and be optimistic about the future, sparks are important. They also appear to be a protective factor. How many times have we heard of a young person wanting to stay out of trouble because they don't want to get kicked off a team or kicked out of a group? I have to keep these grades up so I can stay in this collection of people that I want to be part of. There's real motivation to succeed and to meet standards and to avoid those things that would take those opportunities away when it's a part of your passion and a part of your interest. Now, we know that COVID is changing how many youth pursue their sparks. Some are more effective than others. If your passion is bike riding, you can still go ride a bike, and you can still social distance and get together with friends in many cases. But technology becomes the connector for many types of sparks where you can't just do these things in the current environment. You can have fundraisers, you can lead drives, you can raise awareness, you can pursue relationships and maintain relationships if you have technology. But let's think about technology. This is a very rural state, and many of our youth are not in places where there's a tremendous broadband connection. The dark areas you see on that map are the ones where about 90% or more are connected. And as you can see, there's a lot of light areas. We still have a lot of copper cable and dial-up connections right here in this state. The third common thread of positive youth development are the ideas that you can have positive and projective trajectories across the lifespan. These are not fixed. Just because you grow up in a certain area, just because you're so-and-so's brother or sister, doesn't mean that your trajectory is fixed. They can be significantly influenced by relationships between the individual and their contexts, and whether they're part of an organization like Scouting or Boys and Girls Clubs or 4-H, where they're getting a lot out of this association, and they're also being able to contribute and make those organizations, those contexts better. Human relationships can also have long-lasting impacts on their trajectory. These influences may continue across the entire lifespan. Relationships are huge. They're multi-leveled. We know they can be complicated because we're human beings. And we know that they change constantly as youth mature. They need more challenge. Their needs are going to change. Then what they need out of a relationship is going to change. So let's take a moment and reflect once again. Think about where you're at right now in your life. But what brought you here? What are some of the other paths that your life could have taken? How did you get here? Were there any key people or relationships that really helped bring you to this point that made a huge difference in the way your life went? Please press pause once again, reflect on these questions, and once again, I'll be here when you get back. All right. I'd like to talk about the ultimate trajectory and kind of where we hope the youth go through our work with them, and that is the concept of thriving. Thriving happens when a young person is just flourishing. They're just doing so well, and they're actively contributing to the enrichment of their family and their community and society and the world as a whole. Thriving occurs over time when youth are engaged in those contexts that benefit them and that they are contributing to as well. And when they're taking actions to pursue their sparks with these efforts nurtured and supported through their relationships with those in those surrounding contexts, those awesome peers, those caring adults. Now, it's important to know that thriving is not the same thing as happiness. A frustrated nurse in a hospital might tell a patient, "I'm not here to make you happy, I'm here to make you well." Well, the same thing kind of happens with life as a teenager. Growth can involve struggle, stress, loss, dissatisfaction. We've all felt it, and you can be thriving and still not be happy in any given moment, unfortunately. Thriving is more than just an absence of major problems. So how can we tell if a young person is thriving at all? To answer this question, we're going to look at a couple of models. Now, a model is something that draws from research to build theoretical arguments about how something works. It then tests and refines that argument With additional research, and if it holds up, it becomes a way to explain or describe that thing. Well, there's two models we're going to look at that are very respected and influential and help us answer the question of thriving. The first is the 5 C's from Dr. Richard Lerner out of Tufts University. This model came from research launched in 2002. It was the first national study of its kind in which 7,000 participants from 44 states were studied. And they started when they were in 5th grade. Each year they went to the next grade and they were studied again in each successive wave. They studied them for 8 years till they got all the way through high school. And this is what they found. The research team found that having meaningful leadership opportunities, positive relationships over time, and opportunities to build important life skills can lead to 5 key developmental outcomes. And they called these the 5 C's. These are competence, connection, confidence, character, and caring. Now, Lerner went on to say that youth who have these 5 C's will be on a developmental path for a 6th C, which is contribution. You notice the first 5 C's are all individual characteristics. These are characteristics of a young person who's flourishing. They're competent, they're connected, they're confident, they have good character, they're caring. The 6th C is about what they give back. When they have that 6th C of contribution, they're giving back to themselves, they're contributing to family, to their community, to society as a whole. And when they're doing that, when they have all 5 C's and they've attained that 6th C, Lerner said that at that point, they are said to be thriving. Now, a second model is called the Thriving Model, and it is by Dr. Mary Arnold out of Oregon State University. This model is currently being tested further, and I'm involved with that, so I'm excited to be able to share this with you. And it's really exciting because this model is focused on how youth get to these outcomes of the 5 C's. How do they become these connected people with good character who are confident? The answer in this model and in her research is thriving. Here's what the model looks like. As I mentioned earlier, when youth are on a thriving trajectory, they are on a path to achieve key developmental outcomes. However, these developmental outcomes differ between the two models. There are several between the two that align. The Thriving Model aligns with the 5 C's in 4 areas: competence, personal standard, connections, and contribution. It views confidence as being something that's kind of contained within the others, and caring is more of an indicator than a developmental outcome. The Thriving Model identifies additional outcomes, which include academic motivation and success, reduction in risk behaviors, and healthful choices. It all begins with developmental relationships, and at the center of all that, as I mentioned, is youth sparks. So what makes a developmental relationship developmental? Keep in mind I'm a practitioner, and so I approach this through a practitioner's lens. The first is a secure attachment between the youth and the caring adult who is working with them. And mutual warmth, respect, trust. And it's bidirectional. It's not just something where you're talking at youth, you're doing programs for youth, but you're co-collaborating, engaging together with both of you gaining from the experience. Developmental relationships grow over time, and because they have to address changing needs. As their world's growing and becoming more complex, the skills that youth need to navigate that world also become different and more complex, and the needs they have from their relationships become different. And over time, it shifts power. Instead of becoming all adult-driven, it becomes a partnership, reflecting on the young person's increasing competence, their autonomy, their decision-making, the need for independence, and the realization that they are forming their identity. So what does the thriving trajectory look like? The Thriving Model incorporates 6 indicators for a thriving trajectory that were identified by the Search Institute, and each of them has a wealth of research behind it. First, these are youth who enjoy challenge, exploring new things. They're open to challenge and discovery. They have a sense of purpose, optimism for the future. They tend to believe in things that are larger than themselves. Maybe it's a faith, maybe it's a spirituality, but it's something that shapes their everyday thoughts and actions. They tend to be positive and optimistic. They can manage their own emotions, which is not always easy, especially when you're dealing with new emotions and intensities that you've never experienced before. They tend to be respectful, responsible, honest, caring. They value helping others. And they set goals and create effective strategies to achieve them. And they don't give up when things get tough. So being able to self-regulate and be intentional about that is a key indicator that a young person is on a thriving trajectory. So what are you going to take away from this? My hope is that you know that the positive youth development approach is really not just code for happy talk. We know that there are very real risks and vulnerabilities that are unique to this stage of life. Recognizing this fact is not a deficit approach. We realize that young people have strengths and capabilities that they can bring to bear, but we also have to look at the situation as it exists. Positive youth development reminds us that there are unique strengths of this period as well. All youth have strengths and great potential for a thriving trajectory. We must work to provide contexts and relationships that nurture this, bring out their best, and give them the best opportunity to have a great future ahead. I hope that you've enjoyed this look at positive youth development, and I appreciate you being on this little journey with me. I hope that it's given you new things to think about, some new things to reflect on. It's an important topic, and I hope that this gives you additional lens through which to view some of the material, and look forward to seeing where we go from here. Take care.